if you could talk about the brick makers and the Rico scenario, I think that sticks out as one of the times you had people, kind of standing up. If you could go ahead and elaborate on that, or just kind of give a brief synopsis and what was important about it.
Wow, well, it's a very old story. It's when I was in the Peace Corps in Ecuador, and I spent the first couple of years in the Peace Corps in the Amazon rainforest with indigenous people there. And then I was moved up into the Andes for the last year or the third year to work with a brickmakers co-op to help them organize themselves into a marketing co-op so that they didn't get screwed by middlemen who bought the bricks very cheap from them and sold them much more expensively to construction companies. And they were, as they formed a co-op, and they were resisting some of this, and one of them had gone to the mayor of the city and complained, and shortly after that was killed, hit by a truck. It was pretty obvious to most people that it wasn't an accident, and the community was scared, and they were willing to do just about anything not to let that happen again. And they really were giving in, and I persuaded them that it wasn't the authorities that were going to be able to help them, that they had to stand up for their own rights. It was really important that they take matters into their hands and understand that they had a right to change, and I get deeply involved in that. And it worked for them. And it usually works for people. And so it's an example of where we are today. I think this time of this presidential election is very important because we have to recognize that no matter who the next president is, he or she will not have a lot of power. It's very limited. And this is a democracy. And in a democracy, we the people are supposed to have the power. The problem has been that with the election laws the way they are, where big money is so important, and where even a candidate, let's say Bernie Sanders wins, it doesn't take any money from any big corporations, he's still going to be surrounded by members of Congress, the Senate, lobbyists that have tremendous connections to big corporations, and they will call the shots. And we need to understand that and not expect our presidents to work miracles, but to understand that we're the ones that have to do it. So whoever your candidate is, I'd encourage you to think about what is it that appeals to you about your candidate. What are the big issues that most appeal to you? And if your candidate gets elected, just push hard for those issues. Don't expect the candidate to do it alone. You go out and use social media. Social media is so powerful. Use everything you've got to push that issue. If your candidate doesn't get elected, don't just give in. Push the issue anyway. Use social media. Start a consumer movement. Start political movements. There's so much we as individuals can do. And in a way, we've really allowed big money and powerful interests to usurp our democracy. They've been very clever. They've used the media in very clever ways, but we've allowed it also. There's been a lot of lethargy. And just saying, well, geez, if just so-and-so gets elected, if just Obama gets elected, if just so-and-so gets elected, everything will be fine. Well, it doesn't work that way, and we need to understand that.
Let me take it back. There was two things I want to pull out about that brick story. So number one, we have people who are inside of the transaction or inside of the economy, so to speak, and their only purpose is to act as a middleman, and their only purpose is to extract money from the transaction but not actually add any value to the product. They didn't actually add anything to the brick. All they did was transport the brick, or maybe not even transport the brick, just serve as like a connection maker between the people who actually made the bricks and the people who are buying them. And I think it's important that we understand that, that is a model that exists throughout our economy. And you said it was a failed economy, and part of the reason is there's a lot of people there that are middlemen and they're just usurping. But what I liked about what you said was how they ruled through fear, and only through solidarity and working together could they actually overcome and create what they made was a co-op that's fairly successful and it worked out for them. So I really like that story, particularly for that reason. That's why I clung to it and I listened to it over and over and over, because I think that that's a massive lesson. Like that's something that we all need to be aware of. Now, moving on to the elected officials. I think I have an internal struggle with this. I think I've spoken with Ben about this too. But I know you say elected officials can't do it all alone, and you're right, they can't. But there are some elected officials that are strong enough of character and strength of will that they can actually resist being in a tide of garbage. There are people that are be a rock pointing in the right direction, and a tide is flowing in the completely opposite way. They will be eroded eventually over time, but they are there, and we have to make sure we reach out and support those people. In your book, you spoke about the vast difference on foreign policy between Carter and Reagan. Could you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, it's not quite sure where you want to go with that, but I mean, there was obviously a huge difference in that Reagan was a very conservative Republican who went after communism and tried to basically pin communism on everybody he didn't like Torrijos of Panama and Roldós of Ecuador, who both were assassinated very shortly after Reagan came into power. Reagan had this very, very dark, conservative view of the world, and anybody he didn't like, he'd label as a communist, and we'd go after him. But Carter was a very, very different person, personality-wise, and the Democratic platform was quite different at the time. But another major difference was that Reagan actually had a lot of political clout. He had some political savvy, or at least he had people working for him with that, and Carter lacked that to a very large degree, so was fairly ineffective at moving forward with his platforms. And I think once again we have to look at another aspect of that, in that the Republicans and the people who voted Reagan into power really stood behind him. The Democrats really didn't get behind Carter. And we've seen something similar with Obama, that Obama's campaigns back about 8 years ago often looked like religious rallies. I mean, it was just wild. They were crazy. They was like rock concerts. They were rock concerts. Everybody got very, very excited. But once he became president, that kind of went away. People who voted for Obama didn't really get behind him in a big way. And I think there's a huge lesson here, that we need to get behind the candidates once we elect them. We also need to recognize that even when our candidate isn't elected, there's a lot we can do to keep pushing our agendas forward, the things we really, really believe in, and that we, the people, are the ones with the power. We have to also understand, I think, that our elected officials are extremely vulnerable. If someone really stands up to the system, they're likely to be torn apart. As an example, and I talk about this in the books, John Kennedy, the only president in my lifetime who hasn't been supported by big corporations, wasn't elected with big corporate money. His father basically financed his campaign. We've now got two candidates running who claim not to take money from corporations, Sanders and Trump. Opposite ends, but they're both claiming this. The only one that's taking money from big corporations, and admits it at least, is Hillary. But if we look at Kennedy, everybody knew Kennedy was having affairs with lots of women. And that was okay. They had to take him down with a gun. Now, when Clinton came along, he was politically assassinated with a sex scandal. He was impeached. And, you didn't need a gun anymore. The morality of the country, the attitude of the country had changed so much that you could destroy a person politically by a rumor, or in this case it was apparently a fact. And he lied about it, which was unfortunate. But I think everyone out there has skeletons in their closet. And even if we could, let's assume Sanders doesn't have any skeletons, and let's assume he gets elected and doesn't take any money from corporations. If the FBI wants to, they can plant skeletons in his closet. They have access to all of his emails, all of his phone messages. Whoever is in a position of power today, and it's not just the presidents, it's also our other elected officials, and so our corporate executives. They're in very, very vulnerable positions. They can be assassinated politically or professionally without a gun, without physical injury. And we need to get that. We need to understand that.
I want to double down on that, because I remember John Edwards was very, very popular. And, he was a very successful attorney, and he went after corporations, and he stood on behalf of the people in certain cases, not in all cases. Obviously, we have a a right-shifted, pro-corporate spectrum of political thought in America today, right? But as far as that goes, he actually did make some waves. And what happened to him? A huge scandal came out, and he was politically assassinated, just like you just mentioned in the story.
Well, there's
But
a lot of examples of that, Nick. I mean, another one is John Dean. You remember the Scream?
of
Well,
Howard, yeah,
he didn't really scream. He was enthusiastic. That's not usually considered bad. I think it was a setup. Frankly, I mean, this is just supposition, but I think that the powers that behind the election didn't want him in there, and they had something on him. And the Scream was a way for him to bow out without being exposed for whatever they had on him. We also saw the head of the IMF, Strauss-Kahn, who was quite possibly going to be the next president of France and was looking at really attacking the European central banking system. We saw him taken out by a sex scandal. Now, in that case, and in so many of these cases, John Dean and so many others, there's a real story. There's a real story behind the story. Strauss-Kahn was undoubtedly a sex addict. But you see, the system knows that. Those who want to take him out know that. You send a chambermaid who you've hired to seduce him into his room, and he's easily seduced anyway. It doesn't take very much, probably. But then, if you recall, Strauss-Kahn, he succumbed to this weakness that they knew he had anyway. He did something inappropriate, something wrong. He'd been doing a lot of wrong things, apparently. But they waited till he got on an airplane in an airport in New York. I think it was JFK, and then sent in the police to take him off the plane in handcuffs with all the cameras rolling. The media knew this was going to happen. And that was not necessary. That was a huge show. That destroyed the man politically. And it was a setup. I have no doubt about it. And I'm also have no doubt that he was a sex addict. I'm not trying to defend his actions toward women, but I am saying that they know. If you got a weakness, man, watch out. Guard that weakness, because it's going to come back to haunt you if
yeah.
you're in a position of power.